Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to On the Bright Line podcast, Tales from Recovering Food Addicts from the perspective of a physician, a therapist, and an off-the-wall storyteller. We are not affiliated or endorsed by Brightline Eating, and all content presented in this podcast represents our personal opinions and does not represent medical, nutritional, or psychological professional advice. And welcome to the next episode of On the Bright Line podcast. Today we are going to talk about crystal vasers and what that means. So there's probably some question marks above people's heads right now is what a crystal vase is. Robin asked me, she's like, what is a crystal vase?
Define that.
Define a crystal vase. So we're going to, not only we talk about crystal vase and crystal vasers, but we're going to talk about slipping up in your program or, things happening versus another BLE-ism, which is being in the ditch. So those three things, what those mean and how they compare and contrast to one another. So I will explain what a crystal vase is, just because a lot of people might not know. It is a terminology that Susan Pierce Thompson has coined in the BLE community for people who have not broken their bright lines. And the reason why she uses the crystal vase is the analogy is because once a crystal vase is broken, ain't nothing you can do about it. It's gone. So you can never have that vase back in the form that it was before. And so we'll talk about the implications of that and what that means. But people use the terminology in the BLE community to describe themselves like I would be considered a crystal vaser because I have not broken lines since I started the program. Bonny, do you want to talk about being in the ditch and what being in the ditch means?
Sure. I think it's open to interpretation. I'll start with that. I think being in the ditch probably for most people means being completely off their program. So indulging in, sugar and flour, eating between meals. For people that prior to getting in BLE were binging, literally just, eating a ton of food that they shouldn't be eaten. That I view that as being in the ditch is like I am fully immersed in my food addiction,
right?
And I'm off the program, and I'm not able to get myself in the moment back on. Versus a slip.
Right.
Is,
and I was going to say, let's talk about what a minor slip might look like, because, and again, let's back up just a little bit because there might be people here who have picked up at this point and haven't listened to some of the earlier episodes. We're talking about, in the program, we have 4, what we call bright lines, which means that they're solid, lines in the sand that we don't cross, which are, we don't eat sugar, we don't eat flour, we eat meal during meal times, which most people do 3 meals a day. Some people do more if they're on a different kind of plan, and we weigh and measure our portions. So those are the things we're talking about. Slipping up, being outside of the plan. So being in the ditch would be throwing caution to the wind, not paying attention to any of them. And then what you're gonna say is, what does a minor slip look like, or how could we define that?
Yeah, and I think a minor slip can be everything from I went out to eat and I ordered something I thought was BLE compliant and only realized halfway through the meal that it had sugar or flour in it or whatever. Doing that accidentally, doing that intentionally. We've talked about holidays. You're at a holiday and I just want to have that one thing that's not on my plan because I want to have it. It can be everything from I'm having a BLE compliant grain, but I'm having it at a time that wasn't planned. I think all those are minor slips. Slips can lead to the ditch for some people very quickly. And then depending on your susceptibility, how susceptible you are to food addiction. If you're a 10 on the susceptibility scale, one slip can lead you to the ditch. If you're a 2, one slip might be like, that was a slip, and you're just right back on the plan.
Right. And so I think there's a lot of talk in the community about the value of being a crystal vaser. And I think the thing that I think what I want to talk about and maybe get Robin's input on is that what a lot of people talk about, and because I haven't lived this life yet, I don't know, is that once you lose your lines, it is so hard to come back. And so that's something that I hear a lot of from people within the community, that they're like, if you have a crystal vase, keep it, because it is so hard to come back once you've broken your lines, been in the ditch, or even just minorly slipped. You know what I mean? Because the exceptions could be hard. So anyway, I'll stop talking. I want to hear from you.
I think there's so many pieces that go on with that, right? That idea of when I have a slip once, is there that rationalization of, well, see, I slipped before and it was fine, right? I can get right back on. I'm not as susceptible, right? Maybe, I can do this. And I think that hits on that, like the cognitive behavioral piece of, what am I saying to myself in my head about that slip? Right? What is the language that I'm using about that of, see, it's fine. It's okay that I did that, versus, wow, why did I do that?
Well, and I will say there's a really popular phrase in the community, permission to be human.
Right.
And so let's also talk about that.
Yes.
And, what that means. What does permission to be human mean? So.
Right. And I think there is this continuum of, am I rationalizing my slip? Right. Or am I being willing to have a really honest look at it and say, oh, okay, yeah, I slipped because of X, Y, Z, and right? I like to talk about the permission fairy, right? The permission fairy is going to be able to, to sit on our shoulder and say, yeah, I get why you had that slip. You are human. But again, diving down to the why. Why did I have that slip? What was going on? So rather than beating yourself up about the slip, right? Because that's where the perfectionism can come in, right? Which is so damaging. So rather than having that language of, I am going to beat myself up and get caught up in the awfulizing of the slip and why I am awful, right? Not that the slip was awful. I am awful because I slipped, right? But that willingness to say, okay, I am a human person and I had a human moment, and I'm going to be willing to look at the why of that moment, so that perhaps I could keep that moment from happening again. Perhaps I need to bump up my EAP. Perhaps I need to bump up my connection or my commitment to the program. I need to go back and do some of the modules, right?
I think support is a big function of that as well. So I haven't told this story yet, so news to you guys. I've been out of town. I was out of town for a long extended period of time, and I came back in town, and life is lifey, and I've been tired and whatever. So the other night I had made a plan, and I wrote down my food, as I do. I write down my food every night before, and so I had planned for one vegetable, and I switched it to another. And in that moment, and I actually felt like it was a heavier vegetable. Like I was like, oh, I want the starchier, heavier vegetable instead of the one that I had planned for. And it was like, in that moment, I'm just like, why did I do that? Like, why did I do that?
Sure,
right? Because it was, was I still bright? Of course I was still bright. I didn't break my lines, but the whole point of writing down your food is the commitment is to take away the choice and take away the need for willpower in that moment. And I made a choice that maybe wasn't the best choice in the moment. And so, the reality is that, it's permission to be human, like in that moment. But I also took a step back and I'm like, well, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's like exhaustion and getting back to a normal routine, all those things. But I also immediately reached out to my mastermind group and said, hey guys, I just want you to know I did this.
Yep.
And again, not in a shame, because I would have gone to shame in my previous life, not in a shameful way, but just in a, hey, I want to be accountable, and I want you guys to know that I switched something else up on my food program.
Right.
So, and not from a permission giving standpoint either. I didn't want anyone to say, oh, it's okay. Right. I didn't want anybody to say that. And it's funny because it was kind of a mixed message from the two people in my mastermind group. One people was like, oh, it's fine. And the other person was like, I'm keeping your commitment that you won't do it again.
Right. Yeah. But that's interesting, because I think in this society we have gotten so used to giving other people blanket permission. Oh, it's fine that you did that. Oh, it's okay. You had a hard time, right? We have all these rationalizations that are not always true.
Right. And being in a support circle or support group. Like, I think that's where I stand with, when it comes to people, when it comes to this program. So let me back up a little bit. So when it comes to this program, because I'm a crystal vaser and I tend to probably err on the side of perfectionism, I hold that very valuable, that I have been within my bright lines. And so when I hear people that permission give or make excuses or rationalizations for them breaking their lines, I get super judgy. And I'm not saying that's healthy or that's okay. What I'm saying is that's my first gut instinct in my mind is to say, why would you do that? Why would you break your lines? And like, you could have not done it, like
Right.
instead of going to the place of, oh, it's okay. Or, like, let's get curious about this or whatever. And then I normally come down back from that. And, and I'm like, okay, let's get curious about that. Like what was going on and that sort of thing. But in this community, where we're here to support each other, like I want to make sure that I am supportive and not enabling. And that is, and I unfortunately probably err on this side of judgment a little too much, but I also don't, I get fearful of being an enabler of anybody else.
Yeah.
So I think that,
And I think the get curious thing is really important because I think what most people experience if they have a slip or are in the ditch or whatever to whatever level for them it is. I think there is guilt and shame. And I think for all of us that have an eating addiction, we have spent our life in guilt and shame about our weight, about our bodies, about our food choices. I mean, our whole lives are just filled with that.
Right.
And so we very easily go to guilt and shame. And I think that get curious thing is really important. If you're in the ditch, if you had a slip, if you switched your vegetable, right? I mean, there's the give yourself permission to be human. I'm a human being and I made a mistake, and that doesn't make me a bad person.
right.
Put shame off the table.
Right.
And immediately get curious. Oh, wow. This isn't where I wanted to be.
Right.
But this is where I am now. How did I get here? Oh, interesting. Now I can see that, this experience led to this emotion, led to this behavior. Now what can I implement for next time? Next time I have this stressor, I am going to, make sure that I've prepackaged that meal because I know when I get home, I'm going to be really tired and stressed. And if I haven't prepackaged it, I'm going to make a choice, or I might be tempted to make a choice.
Right.
I don't want to get in that situation again. So I think it's really important. I've heard people that had minor slips be like, well, I'm in the ditch. And I'm like, well, what happened? Are you binging?
Yeah.
Well, I had a snack and I switched my vegetable. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, personally, I don't call
Yeah.
it. I said,
Right.
I really view in the ditch as like, I am in a,
Off
I'm in
Right.
an addiction spiral.
Right,
That I
absolutely.
can't get myself out
Yeah.
of.
Not
which is-
like one.
Right.
But then
yeah,
again, like
instance.
Robin's saying, we also don't want to rationalize away, oh, it was just a little slip, because for most of us,
Yeah.
a little
Slippery
slip is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you really got to take it seriously.
Yeah.
I have definitely had minor slips. I'm not a crystal vaser.
Yeah.
I try to acknowledge it when it happens, but I can be in moments where I'm rationalizing it.
Yeah.
So it's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous thing. I think any kind of addiction recovery, it truly is a lifelong process. I remember in medical school, we had a training on addiction, and they brought a gentleman in who had been addicted to cocaine. And he had been a corporate executive and had a very powerful job and a successful life. And this cocaine addiction just took him completely out. I mean, it ruined his life. And he had been sober for 10 years. And I remember I asked him, I'm like, well, how do you feel now? And he said, every day I wake up and think, I'd really like some cocaine.
Yeah.
And then I tell myself I'm an addict and I can't do that. And I move on. And I mean, that just made such an impression on me. Like, wow, 10 years. I mean, he got his life all back together.
Right.
And yet he recognized that he had to look in the mirror every day and go, I'm still this person.
Yeah.
I still have this problem and I have to face it. And I think that's when you have the minor slip. It's, if you're otherwise doing really great with your program, it could be really tempting to be like, oh, it's a minor slip and I'm doing fine. And that's it. And just to gloss over it
Right.
instead of embrace every minor slip as well, I really didn't want to have slips and I've had one.
Right.
So why?
Right. But also not going down the shame spiral.
Exactly.
Like I think that's because
Yes.
that's unfortunately where I I think I tend to live
Absolutely.
in that shame spiral of, oh, if I do anything, like if it's 0.1 off of the scale, then I'm breaking my
Guess what
line.
food addicts
Yeah.
do when they're in a shame spiral?
Yeah, they eat. Right. Yeah, they definitely eat.
Yeah.
So.
That's what I was going to talk about, was like the what is that downfall of the shame, right? What is
Yeah.
the price that you pay for sitting in that shame?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's that struggle to say, right, that the shame has never actually helped me get where I want to go. But yet we all go
can we say
there.
that one more time?
Yeah, the shame has never helped you get where you want to go. It is actually a barrier to getting you where you want to go.
Yeah.
So that willingness to sit and figure out what's the purpose of that shame in the past, right? And a lot of people, I think, use shame as, or were taught that shaming is motivating, right? And the problem is that the shame becomes a headwind that you fight against instead of something that is a tailwind that actually motivates you.
Yep. I definitely feel that for sure. So, I think, I don't know what else we have to say about these concepts. I think for me, the reality is that we do have names for them. I don't know how helpful they are, to be perfectly honest. It's hard because I think there's some, obviously there's some pride around the fact if you're a crystal vaser, but how do you navigate that amongst a group of people that are not, may not be crystal vasers, but also how do we give permission to be human if people, because, we are addicts, like at the end of the day, like we are addicts, and there, it is very reasonable that people are gonna, they're gonna mess up and they're gonna fall off the wagon. But it's like, how do we make that fall off the wagon the shortest lived time that it can be? Because I think that's the other thing, is like, how do we get to a place where if we do make that slip, if we do, break the line or whatever the case might be, that we don't live in that space and live in that shame spiral. Cause I think that that's the struggle, right? And like Bonnie said, it's the lifelong.
Yeah. And I think the crystal vase is what it represents is a very healthy and appropriate fear of getting to
that's me.
But I mean, a healthy and appropriate fear of experimenting or tinkering or breaking a line, because that that could lead to something that you don't want. But it also can't be like, if I don't have a crystal vase, I'm not a bright lifer. If I don't have a crystal vase, I'm not engaged in this program. It's like not true. You know what I mean? Like many people with addiction that eventually find sobriety relapse multiple times of every substance that there is. It's so hard. This is such a hard thing, beating addiction of any kind. The stats are terrible. So if you're on your program and you've had a slip and you got back on and you're on,
that's amazing.
I mean, maybe we need to have another word for that, right? A separate kind of word of valor or of recognition that's not,
okay, guys, we got to come up with that right now.
That's separate from a crystal vaser, but you're a survivor, right? I mean, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. No. So I think the idea of a crystal vase is beautiful. And I always say, like, Susan Pierce Thompson will, in a lot of her videos, talk about, well, I did that experiment and you're welcome to do that experiment. And I always think to myself, nope, I'm a 10 on the addiction scale. I don't need to try the experiment. I absolutely know. I can learn from someone else's experiment. So I think that idea of staying in the crystal vase so that you're not going to risk taking an experiment is great. But again, we've got to remove the shame from, if you break your crystal vase, you're still, like, you are not actually made of crystal. You're not broken. Right? You're still a whole person, and you can still move into recovery.
There's actually a Japanese art.
Kintsugi,
thank you. Right? And so that is the idea that when something breaks, right, that the repair is made with gold, so that there is that awareness that it is not what it was, but it is still beautiful and wonderful.
I love that.
But I think the thing is that with kintsugi, it is normally it is like pottery, like ceramic pottery.
Yes.
So putting it back together with gold actually makes it more valuable.
Yes.
So it is when it is repaired, when it is put back together, it is not only more beautiful, but it is also more valuable, and that is the joy of that art form, which is called kintsugi. So I was thinking that.
I love
honestly.
that. And that's totally I mean, how much stronger are you if you fell in the ditch and then you got back to your sobriety?
It's like a broken bone, right? Broken bones, when they heal, are stronger, like
Absolutely.
where they mend back together. So I think I definitely think that there's incredible value in re-examining how we feel about that and trying to remove the shame.
Because that shame pushes on the not good enough button.
Right.
Yeah. Or that I lost, like it's a win or lose thing, and that there's no win or lose. This is a lifetime. This is a lifetime behavior change we're trying to make. There's no win or lose.
Right.
It's not like you hit an endpoint and you're done. you know, so
Right.
it's not like if I get my crystal vase to the finish line to,
Right.
you know, to April 3rd or to, you know, September 15th, or there's no point at which, right, you
Yeah.
win a prize because you kept a crystal vase to that
Right.
point, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
all about lifelong sobriety.
Yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts that we have today about crystal vasers and being in the ditch? And okay, so I think, you know, my wrap up thoughts are that I think that no matter where you are in your program, that moving in the direction of growth is the most important and most valuable thing, whether that is that you've never broken a line since you started or whether you've been in the ditch 27,000 times. I don't think it matters. I think the reality is that we are all working towards the goal of having freedom from food addiction, having sobriety in this place, and living the healthiest lives that we can live. And so for me, I just want to encourage everybody that we can do this. We can do this together, and we can be in different places and do it together. Like that's the other thing, is that we don't all have to be coming from the same place. So that is our episode today. As always, if you have ideas for topics that you want us to talk about or questions for us, feel free to email us at onthebrightlinepodcast@gmail.com or check us out on social media. Have a great day.